The test was still in her hand when Elena heard the front door open. 2 lines. Clear and pink and impossible to misread. She had checked 3 times, sitting on the edge of the bathtub with her heart pounding so loudly she could hear it in her ears. 6 weeks. The doctor's clinic had confirmed it that morning, and the nurse had smiled and told her to take care of herself, to rest when she could, to start thinking about names. Elena had walked out of that clinic into the bright afternoon sun feeling like the whole world had shifted quietly on its axis, like she had been let in on a secret meant only for her. All afternoon she had planned this moment. She had thought about lighting candles, about cooking his favorite meal, about finding some clever way to tell him that would make him laugh before the truth landed. In the end, none of that mattered, because the second she heard his key turn in the lock, every careful plan dissolved, and all that was left was pure, uncomplicated joy, pushing her toward the door. She wiped her eyes, smoothed her hair, and hurried down the hallway with the test still clutched in her fingers, because she wanted Nathaniel to see it the moment she told him, wanted to watch his face change the way hers had changed. She pictured him lifting her off the ground the way he had when he proposed, spinning her until she begged him to stop laughing long enough to breathe. Nathaniel Cross stood in the kitchen with his coat still on, scrolling through his phone. He did not look up when she entered. "Nathaniel." Her voice cracked with excitement. "I have to tell you something." He glanced at her, distracted, then back at his phone. "Can it wait? I have a call in 10 minutes. "No, it can't." She stepped closer and held out the test, her hand trembling slightly. "I'm pregnant. 6 weeks. We're going to have a baby." For a moment nothing happened. He simply looked at the test, then at her, his expression unreadable. She had imagined this moment 100 times on the drive home. She had imagined him lifting her off her feet, laughing, calling his mother, calling everyone. She had not imagined silence. "Say something," she whispered. He set his phone down slowly on the counter. When he finally spoke, his voice was flat, stripped of anything warm. "The baby isn't mine." The words did not register at first. Elena actually laughed, a short, confused sound. "What?" "You heard me." He crossed his arms. "I was in Denver for 11 days last month. Before that, Chicago for a week. Do the math, Elena." "Do the math?" Her voice rose. "Nathaniel, I don't understand what you're accusing me of. We were together the week before you left for Denver. You know that. You were there." "Was I?" His eyes were cold, colder than she had ever seen them, colder than the night his father died and he had not cried at the funeral. Or is that just what you want me to remember? "Why are you saying this?" Tears blurred her vision now, hot and sudden. "I have never once given you a reason to doubt me, not once in 2 years. People change," he said. "People get lonely. People make mistakes and then look for someone convenient to blame it on." The accusation hit her like a slap. She thought of every night she had sat awake waiting for him to come home from late meetings, every dinner she had kept warm on the stove, every business trip she had supported without complaint because she believed in his ambition, believed in their marriage, believed in him. "I have never touched another man," she said, each word deliberate, each word true. "You know that. Somewhere in you, you know that." She thought of the early days of their marriage, when he used to text her from meetings just to tell her he missed her voice, when he used to leave notes in her coat pocket before he left for work, small folded pieces of paper that said things like, "Today will be a good day, because I get to come home to you." That man felt impossibly far away now, replaced by someone whose eyes had gone hard and distant, someone reciting accusations like lines from a script he had memorized rather than words that came from his own heart. "People don't change overnight, Nathaniel," she said, softer now, almost pleading. "Something happened. Someone said something to you. Please, just tell me what it is, and let me answer it. Let me defend myself properly, instead of standing here while you throw accusations at me that make no sense." "There's nothing to defend," he snapped. "The timeline speaks for itself." "The timeline proves nothing except that you've already decided I'm guilty," she said, her voice rising with frustration now. "You haven't asked me a single real question. You haven't asked where I was, who I saw, what I did during those weeks. You've simply announced a verdict and expected me to accept it." "What I know," he said, stepping closer, his voice dropping into something almost menacing, "is that my mother warned me about you from the beginning. She said you married me for the name, for the money, for the life I could give you. I told her she was wrong. Maybe I was the fool." Elena felt something inside her crack open, a wound she did not know she carried until this exact second. "Diane has hated me since the day we met. You know that too. And you're choosing to believe her over your own wife, over the child growing inside me?" "I'm choosing to protect myself," Nathaniel said. I built everything I have from nothing. I am not going to let a scandal, a paternity question, a public mess, destroy what I've spent my whole life building. If this is a mistake, it's yours to fix, not mine. This isn't a mistake. Her hand went instinctively to her stomach, protective, fierce. This is our child. Prove it, he said. Get a test. Get lawyers. Get whatever you need. Until then, I want you gone. The words landed like ice water. Gone. This is my home. It was never yours, Nathaniel said quietly. It's in my name. Everything in this house is in my name. You'll understand that better once the lawyers get involved. She stared at him, searching his face for some flicker of the man she had married, the man who had proposed to her on a rooftop overlooking the city, who had promised her forever, with tears in his own eyes. She found nothing. Only a stranger wearing his features, hardened by something she did not yet understand. Someone has poisoned you against me, she said softly. I don't know who, or how, but someone has done this. And when I find out, Nathaniel, you are going to regret every single word you just said to me. He did not answer. He simply turned, walked to the hall closet, and pulled out her suitcase, the same one she had used on their honeymoon 3 years ago, and set it down at her feet. Pack tonight, he said. I'll have someone send the rest of your things tomorrow. Elena stood frozen, the test still in her hand, the 2 pink lines now smudged from where her fingers had gripped it too tightly. She looked at the suitcase, then at her husband, then at the home she had spent 2 years turning into something beautiful, something warm, something she had believed would hold their family for the rest of their lives. She thought about arguing further. She thought about screaming, about begging him to listen to reason, about calling his mother directly and confronting the woman she suspected was behind all of this. But something in his eyes told her that no words would reach him tonight. Whatever had been said to him, whatever lie had been planted in his mind, it had already taken root too deeply to pull out with tears. So instead, she straightened her back, wiped her face one final time, and picked up the suitcase. You'll regret this, she said, her voice steady now, stronger than she felt. Not because of what I'll do to you, but because of what you're about to lose. She packed quickly, mechanically, taking only what mattered. Photographs, important documents. A small wooden box that held her late father's watch. She did not take the jewelry Nathaniel had given her, did not take anything that felt like it belonged to the life she was leaving behind. When she walked past him at the door, he did not look at her. He stood by the window, staring out at the city lights, his jaw tight, his arms crossed, a man convinced of his own righteousness. For what it's worth, Elena said quietly, pausing at the threshold. I loved you, completely. And somewhere inside you, before whoever did this got to you, I think you loved me too. He said nothing. She stepped outside into the cold night air, the door closing behind her with a soft, final click that felt louder than any slam could have been. She stood on the front steps for a long moment, suitcase in hand, one palm resting gently against her stomach, and looked up at the dark windows of the home that no longer belonged to her. The street was empty except for a stray cat weaving between parked cars and the distant hum of traffic from the main road. Elena thought about how strange it was that a night could feel so ordinary to the rest of the world while her own life had just been split cleanly in two, a before and an after, with no warning given for the change. She thought about the nursery she had already begun imagining in her mind, soft yellow walls, a rocking chair by the window, and how quickly that image now felt like something borrowed from a life that was no longer hers to live. A part of her wanted to knock on the door again, to demand one more conversation, to find some way to make him see reason. But a stronger part of her, a part she did not know she possessed until this moment, told her to walk away with whatever dignity she had left. She would not beg. She would not shrink herself down to fit his sudden cruelty. Whatever had turned her husband into a stranger in the space of one evening, she would find it, and she would prove her innocence not through tears, but through truth. Then she pulled out her phone, dialed the only number she could think to call, and waited, shivering, as it rang. Elena? Priya's voice was groggy with sleep. It's midnight. What's wrong? Priya. Elena's voice broke for the first time since she had left the house. I need somewhere to stay tonight. What happened? Elena looked back once more at the house, at the life she had built and lost in the span of 10 minutes, and felt a strange, cold determination settle over her grief. I'll explain everything, she said. But first, I need you to come get me. And Priya, I need you to help me find out who did this to my marriage. Because someone did. And I am not going to rest until I know exactly who. She ended the call, tightened her coat against the wind, and waited on the empty street. a woman carrying a secret truth inside her that no cruel word could erase, no matter how coldly it had been spoken. Priya's apartment smelled like cinnamon and old books, a small comfort in a night that had offered none. She opened the door before Elena even knocked, still in her pajamas, her hair pulled back messily, worry etched across her face. "Tell me everything," Priya said, pulling her inside and taking the suitcase from her hands. "Start from the beginning." Elena sat on the worn couch they had bought together years ago from a second-hand shop, back when they were roommates surviving on instant noodles and big dreams, and told her everything. The pregnancy test, Nathaniel's cold accusation, the suitcase waiting by the door as if he had been expecting to need it. By the time she finished, her voice had gone hoarse, and Priya's expression had shifted from shock to fury. "He said the baby isn't his? After 2 years of marriage, after everything you've built together, he just decided that on the spot?" He mentioned his business trips, Denver, Chicago, as if being away for work automatically means I was unfaithful. Elena rubbed her temples, exhaustion pressing down on her like a physical weight. But it wasn't just that, Priya. It was the way he said it. Cold. Rehearsed. Like someone had already convinced him before I even walked through the door. "Diane," Priya said immediately, no hesitation in her voice. "That's what I thought too." Elena closed her eyes, picturing her mother-in-law's tight, disapproving smile at every family dinner, the way Diane always found some small way to remind Elena that she had married above her station, that she would never truly belong in the Cross family. But even Diane couldn't manufacture a lie this specific without help. This felt planned, timed. That night, Elena barely slept. She lay awake on Priya's couch staring at the ceiling, one hand resting on her stomach, replaying the conversation over and over, searching for some detail she had missed, some clue buried beneath the shock of the moment. The following morning, Priya made tea and sat across from her at the small kitchen table, her laptop open between them. "We need a plan," Priya said, "not just for surviving this, but for proving the truth. Nathaniel wants proof. Fine. We'll get him proof so undeniable he won't have a single word left to argue with." "A paternity test," Elena said quietly, "once the baby is far enough along. But that could take weeks." "Then we use the weeks," Priya said. "We find out who put this idea in his head. Because someone did, Elena. People don't turn on the person they love in one night without a reason, even a fabricated one." Over the following days, Elena tried to piece her life back together in fragments. She contacted her design clients, rescheduled meetings, and forced herself to eat regular meals despite the constant knot in her stomach. She avoided calling Nathaniel, though her phone remained silent from his end as well, which somehow hurt more than if he had called to apologize or to argue further. The silence felt like confirmation that he had already moved on from her in his mind, already decided the outcome of a story that had barely begun. Priya, meanwhile, began quietly investigating. She had connections through her marketing job that touched nearly every social circle in the city, and she used them carefully, asking gentle questions disguised as casual conversation, gathering small pieces of information that on their own meant nothing but together began forming a troubling picture. "Victor Lang has been spending a lot of time with Nathaniel lately," Priya said one evening, scrolling through her phone as Elena chopped vegetables for dinner in the tiny kitchen. "More than usual, according to my friend who works at the same building. Long meetings, weekend calls. Someone mentioned Victor looks stressed lately, like something's weighing on him." "Victor's always been close to Nathaniel," Elena said. "They built the company together. It's not unusual for them to spend time together." "Maybe," Priya said, though her tone suggested she was not convinced. "But my friend also said Victor's been asking odd questions. About your marriage. About whether you and Nathaniel seemed happy lately. Why would a business partner care about that?" Elena paused, the knife still in her hand, a strange chill running through her. She had always liked Victor, had always found him charming in an easy, low-key way at company dinners and holiday parties. He had complimented her work more than once, had seemed genuinely interested in her design projects when other business associates glazed over the moment she mentioned her career. It had never occurred to her to view him with suspicion. "You think Victor is involved in this somehow?" she asked slowly. "I don't know," Priya admitted, "but it's strange, isn't it? A business partner suddenly interested in the state of your marriage right before your husband throws an accusation at you out of nowhere." That night, after Priya had gone to bed, Elena sat alone at the kitchen table with her laptop, scrolling through old photographs from company events, trying to recall details from evenings she had not paid close enough attention to at the time. In one photograph from a holiday party 8 months earlier, she noticed something she had never registered before. Victor stood slightly apart from the main group. his phone pressed to his ear, his expression tense in a way that did not match the celebratory mood of the room. Nathaniel stood nearby, oblivious, laughing at something someone else had said. It meant nothing on its own. A businessman on a phone call at a party was hardly unusual. But combined with what Priya had learned, it planted a small seed of doubt that Elena could not shake. The next few days brought no answers, only more questions. Elena visited her doctor for a follow-up appointment, sitting alone in the waiting room surrounded by couples holding hands and discussing nursery colors, feeling the weight of her isolation more acutely than ever. Dr. Marissa Voss, her obstetrician, greeted her warmly, unaware of the storm that had erupted in Elena's personal life since their last visit. "Everything looks perfectly healthy," Dr. Voss said, reviewing the results. "Strong heartbeat, right on track for 6 weeks. Any concerns you want to talk through?" Elena hesitated, then decided honesty was easier than pretending. "My husband is questioning whether the baby is his. He wants proof." Dr. Voss's expression softened with a practiced kind of sympathy, the look of someone who had likely heard similar stories before in her years of practice. "That happens more often than people think, unfortunately. When you're ready, we can absolutely document everything properly. Dates, timelines, all of it. It will hold up to any scrutiny he wants to put it through." "Thank you," Elena said, gratitude cutting through some of her exhaustion. "I want everything documented, every appointment, every date, every detail. I want there to be no question left unanswered when this is over." Walking out of the clinic that afternoon, Elena felt a small measure of her strength returning. She was tired of being the one who explained herself, tired of carrying the burden of proof for a betrayal she had not committed. If Nathaniel wanted proof, she would give him more proof than he could ever ask for, but she would also find out exactly who had turned him against her, and why. 2 days later, Elena received a call from a number she recognized instantly. Diane Cross. She almost let it go to voicemail, but curiosity, and a stubborn refusal to hide, pushed her to answer. "Elena." Diane's voice was clipped, formal, carrying the same cool condescension it always had. "I heard about the situation with Nathaniel." "Did you?" Elena said flatly. "I imagine you heard about it before I even left the house." A pause on the line. "I don't know what you're implying." "I think you know exactly what I'm implying," Elena said, surprising herself with the steadiness in her voice. "You've never wanted me in this family, Diane. Not from the very first dinner. And now, conveniently, right after I tell my husband I'm carrying his child, he suddenly decides I've been unfaithful. Forgive me if I find the timing difficult to ignore." "I would never manufacture something so serious," Diane said, though something in her tone lacked conviction. "Nathaniel makes his own decisions." "Nathaniel," Elena said, "has never once doubted me in 2 years of marriage. Not once. And then, out of nowhere, he doubts me the exact night I tell him I'm pregnant. You'll forgive me if that feels less like a coincidence and more like a plan." "Believe what you like," Diane said, her voice sharpening now, the polite mask slipping just slightly. "But I would advise you to consider your position carefully before making accusations you cannot prove. My son has resources, lawyers, a reputation to protect. You have a suitcase and a friend's couch." The threat, thinly veiled as advice, told Elena everything she needed to know. Diane was not calling out of concern. She was calling to assess how much of a fight Elena intended to put up, and perhaps to warn her against putting up one at all. "Thank you for the call, Diane," Elena said calmly. "It's been very informative." She hung up before her mother-in-law could respond, her hands trembling slightly, though this time not entirely from fear. Something closer to clarity had settled over her instead. Diane's involvement, whatever its exact shape, was no longer a suspicion. It was a certainty. She relayed the conversation to Priya, who listened with her arms crossed, jaw tight with anger on her friend's behalf. "She practically confirmed she knows exactly what's going on," Priya said. "Nobody threatens someone about lawyers and reputation, unless they're worried about being exposed for something." "I need to be smarter about this," Elena said, pacing the small living room. "I can't just react anymore. I need to actually gather proof, something concrete, something that would hold up if this ever becomes a legal matter." Over the following days, Elena adjusted her approach. Instead of waiting for information to come to her, she began actively searching for it. She reached out to a former colleague who now worked in corporate accounting, someone she trusted, and asked carefully worded questions about Nathaniel's company without revealing too much about why she was asking. She learned that there had been unusual activity in some of the company's smaller accounts over the past several months, transfers that did not match typical project expenses, though her contact could not access enough detail to say more without raising suspicion himself. She also began keeping a careful written record of everything: dates, conversations, the strange text message, Diane's phone call, small observations from company events she now viewed through a different lens. Priya helped her organize it all into a folder on her laptop, determined that if this situation ever required lawyers or evidence, Elena would walk into that fight fully prepared. At night, when the apartment grew quiet and Priya had gone to sleep, Elena allowed herself brief moments of grief that she did not permit herself during the day. She thought about the nursery she had planned, about the family she had believed she was building, about the man she had loved, who now felt like a stranger wearing a familiar face. She placed both hands over her stomach in the darkness and made a quiet promise to the child growing inside her. "Whatever happens," she whispered, "I will make sure the truth comes out. I will make sure you know exactly who your mother is, no matter what lies anyone tries to tell you." That evening, her phone buzzed with an unexpected message. It was from an unknown number, the message brief and unsettling. "You should look more closely at who benefits from your marriage falling apart. Not everyone around your husband wants him to succeed." Elena stared at the screen, her heart pounding. She showed it to Priya immediately, both of them reading it several times, trying to decipher any hidden meaning. "Who sent this?" Priya asked. "I don't know," Elena said. "But whoever it is knows something. Something about Nathaniel's business, something about the people around him." She thought again of Victor Lang, of his strange phone call at the holiday party, of Priya's friend mentioning his sudden interest in her marriage. The pieces were still scattered, still unclear, but for the first time since that terrible night in the kitchen, Elena felt something shift inside her. Grief was slowly making room for determination. "Whoever did this to me," she said quietly, staring at the message on her phone, "made one mistake. They assumed I would simply disappear quietly. They assumed I would let Nathaniel's cruelty be the end of my story." She set the phone down and looked at Priya, her jaw set with new resolve. "I'm not disappearing," Elena said. "I'm going to find out exactly what happened. And when I do, everyone involved is going to answer for it." Later that night, unable to sleep despite her exhaustion, Elena found herself scrolling back through old photographs on her phone, searching for anything that might connect the scattered pieces she and Priya had gathered. She paused on a picture from the company's spring gala, taken nearly a year earlier, before any of this had begun. In the photograph, she stood beside Nathaniel, both of them laughing at something just out of frame, while behind them, slightly blurred but still visible, Victor stood watching with an expression that, viewed now with new suspicion, looked less like friendly interest and more like calculation. She zoomed in, studying his face carefully. It was probably nothing, a trick of the camera, a coincidence of timing. But after everything that had happened, Elena found she no longer trusted her old assumptions about the people around her, no longer took kindness or warmth at face value, without wondering what might be hiding beneath it. She saved the photograph to a folder she had started keeping, alongside the strange text message and her growing collection of observations, determined that no detail, however small, would be dismissed too quickly this time. In the morning, she woke to sunlight streaming through Priya's living room window and a strange, unexpected sense of clarity. The grief was still there, heavy and constant beneath everything else. But alongside it now sat something firmer, something that felt almost like purpose. She made herself breakfast, ate slowly at the small kitchen table, and began writing out everything she remembered from the past several months of her marriage. Every strange phone call Nathaniel had taken in another room, every late night he had blamed on work without much explanation, every small detail that had seemed unremarkable at the time but now demanded a second look. By midday she had filled several pages, and though most of it likely meant nothing, a few entries stood out. A weekend trip Nathaniel had taken with Victor to review a potential property investment, one Elena had not thought twice about at the time but which, in retrospect, had come directly before a noticeable shift in his mood, a new tension she had attributed to work stress rather than anything more troubling. She added the detail to her folder, uncertain of its significance but unwilling to discard anything that might later prove useful. D2. The lawyer's office smelled of leather and fresh coffee, a sharp contrast to the chaos churning inside Elena's mind. She sat across from a woman named Carol Whitfield, a family law attorney Priya had found through a colleague, known for handling difficult, high-profile cases with quiet efficiency. "Let's start with the basics," Carol said, pen poised over a legal pad. "You're 6 weeks pregnant, your husband has accused you of infidelity, and he's asked you to leave the shared residence. Is that correct?" "Yes," Elena said. "He said the baby isn't his. He gave me a suitcase and told me to prove myself." Carol's expression remained professionally neutral, though something in her eyes flickered with quiet disapproval. Has he made any formal moves? Divorce filing? Request for a paternity test through legal channels? Anything in writing? No, nothing formal yet, just what he said that night. Good, Carol said. That gives us time to build your position properly before he does anything official. My advice is simple. Document everything, every interaction, every message, every appointment. If he does move toward divorce, we want a clear record showing you did nothing wrong and that you cooperated fully with any request for proof. Elena nodded, gripping her hands tightly in her lap. I already started keeping records. Dates, messages, conversations. Excellent. Carol made a note. I also want you to schedule regular prenatal visits with detailed documentation from your doctor. Establishing a clear, undisputed timeline for the pregnancy will make any future paternity question a formality rather than a battle. I have an appointment with Dr. Voss next week, Elena said. She already agreed to document everything carefully. Good. One more thing. Carol set down her pen and looked at Elena directly. You mentioned your husband's mother may be involved, and possibly his business partner. If there's any truth to that, and if it connects to something financial within his company, that could become relevant to how a judge views the entire situation, particularly around credibility and intent. I'd encourage you to be cautious, but don't ignore it either. Sometimes personal betrayals and financial ones are more connected than people realize. Walking out of the office an hour later, Elena felt something she had not felt since that terrible night in the kitchen, a sense of direction. She was no longer simply reacting to Nathaniel's cruelty. She was building something solid beneath her feet, brick by brick, piece of evidence by piece of evidence. That evening she met Priya at a small cafe near the apartment, the kind of place with mismatched chairs and handwritten chalkboard menus that had become their unofficial headquarters over the past week. I talked to my contact in accounting again, Priya said, sliding into the seat across from Elena, her expression serious. He found something. Small transfers, over the past 4 months, moving out of one of the company's development accounts into a private holding company. Not huge amounts individually, but consistent, regular, like someone skimming carefully enough to avoid triggering alarms. Who has access to that account? Elena asked, though she already suspected the answer. Only a handful of people at that level, Priya said. Nathaniel, obviously, the finance director, and Victor Lang. Elena sat back, processing the information. You think Victor is stealing from the company? I think it's possible, Priya said carefully. And if he is, and if he somehow found out that you were about to have a baby that would tie Nathaniel down even more, make him even more focused on stability and less on business risk, that gives Victor a motive to want your marriage destabilized. A distracted, distrustful Nathaniel is easier to manipulate than a happy, focused one. The theory sent a chill through Elena. It was almost too calculated to imagine, and yet it fit disturbingly well with everything she had observed. Victor's strange phone call at the holiday party, his sudden interest in the state of her marriage, mentioned by Priya's friend, the anonymous message warning her that not everyone around Nathaniel wanted him to succeed. If Victor is stealing money and needs a distraction, Elena said slowly, thinking it through aloud, destroying my marriage would keep Nathaniel emotionally consumed, angry, distrustful, focused on me instead of the company's finances. Exactly, Priya said. And if Diane genuinely believes I'm capable of infidelity, or if she simply saw an opportunity to finally push me out of the family the way she's always wanted, she might have been the perfect tool for Victor to use. Someone Nathaniel already trusts completely, someone with motive of her own, feeding him doubts at exactly the right moment. Elena stared down at her coffee, untouched and gone cold. So this isn't just about me. This is about protecting Victor's theft, and Diane getting what she's always wanted, and Nathaniel being caught in the middle of both, believing it's entirely about me and nothing else.
That's my theory, Priya said.
But we need more than theory. We need proof. Over the following days, Elena threw herself into building that proof with a focus that surprised even her. She contacted Dr. Voss's office and scheduled a follow-up appointment, ensuring every detail of the pregnancy timeline was documented in writing, signed, dated, undisputable. At the appointment, Dr. Voss reviewed the ultrasound carefully, pointing out measurements on the screen with practiced precision. Based on fetal development, conception occurred within a very specific window. I can document this formally in a letter if it would help your situation. Dates like these are difficult to dispute once properly recorded. Please, Elena said. I want everything in writing, signed, official. Dr. Voss nodded, already typing notes into her computer. I'll have my office prepare a formal letter by the end of the week, along with copies of all ultrasound imaging and measurement data. If your husband wants proof, Elena, we'll give him proof that no lawyer or accusation can argue against. Elena thanked her, gratitude and grief mixing uncomfortably in her chest as she left the clinic. It should not have to come to this, she thought, documenting her own pregnancy like evidence in a criminal trial, simply because the father of her child had chosen suspicion over trust. But if this was the path forward, she would walk it without flinching. She kept a careful log of every strange occurrence, cross-referencing dates from company events with the timeline of unusual account transfers that Priya's contact continued quietly tracking. She also reached out, carefully and anonymously, to a few other people within Nathaniel's company, former colleagues she had met at dinners and parties over the years who had always seemed to like her, people who might notice things without realizing their significance. One woman, an assistant in the finance department, mentioned during a casual coffee that Victor had been unusually short-tempered lately, snapping at staff over minor errors, staying late in his office with the door closed more often than usual. He seemed stressed about something, the woman said, stirring sugar into her tea. I assumed it was just work pressure. Everyone's been under a lot of pressure since the Fairmont project fell through. Elena filed the detail away carefully. Stress, snapping at staff, closed doors. Small signs, individually meaningless, but together painting a picture of a man under pressure from something he was working hard to hide. Meanwhile, her relationship with Nathaniel remained frozen in silence. He had not called, had not texted, had not sent any word beyond the brief, cold instructions he had given the night he threw her out. Elena told herself she did not need him to reach out, that she was better off building her case without emotional distractions clouding her judgment. But at night, alone with her thoughts, she could not fully silence the ache of missing the man she had once loved, the man buried somewhere beneath the cruelty he had shown her. One afternoon, nearly 2 weeks after the confrontation, Elena received an unexpected call from Nathaniel's assistant, a soft-spoken young man named Julian, who had always treated her kindly during company events. Elena, I hope it's all right that I'm calling, Julian said, his voice hesitant. I wasn't sure who else to tell this to. What is it, Julian? Elena asked, her pulse quickening. I probably shouldn't be saying anything, he continued, but I overheard something in the office yesterday. Victor was on the phone, and he sounded upset. He said something like, the timing worked out perfectly, and Nathaniel's too distracted to notice anything right now. I didn't think much of it until I heard through the office that you and Nathaniel had some kind of falling out. It just felt like something you should know. Elena's grip tightened on the phone. Did you hear anything else? Who he was talking to? No, I'm sorry. That's all I caught before he noticed me nearby, and lowered his voice. Julian paused. I hope everything's all right, Elena. For what it's worth, I never believed any of the rumors going around the office about you and Nathaniel. You always seemed like a good match to me. Thank you, Julian, Elena said, her voice thick with emotion. You have no idea how much this helps. After the call ended, Elena sat motionless for several minutes, staring at the wall, piecing together the fragments of information she had gathered over the past 2 weeks. Victor's strange behavior, the unexplained financial transfers, Diane's thinly veiled threat. And now, direct confirmation that Victor believed the timing of the marital collapse had worked out perfectly for him. This was no longer a suspicion. This was a pattern, a deliberate, calculated sabotage of her marriage, timed precisely to keep Nathaniel too consumed with personal betrayal to notice the professional betrayal happening right under his nose. She thought back to the early days of Victor and Nathaniel's partnership, how the two men had met in business school, how Victor had always seemed to live slightly in Nathaniel's shadow despite their equal standing on paper. Nathaniel was the visionary, the one clients remembered, the one whose name appeared in industry articles and local business magazines. Victor handled operations, finances, the unglamorous machinery that kept the company running smoothly behind the scenes. Elena had always assumed Victor was content with that role, content to be the quiet architect behind Nathaniel's public success. Now she wondered how many years of quiet resentment might have built beneath that contentment, how many moments of being overlooked, undervalued, might have curdled into something darker. A man skilled enough to move money quietly through hidden accounts for months without detection was not a man acting on impulse. This was patient, deliberate, calculated theft, and calculated theft required calculated cover, a distraction significant enough to occupy Nathaniel's full attention, while the real damage continued unnoticed. She called Priya immediately, relaying everything Julian had told her. We need to bring this to Carol, Priya said without hesitation. This isn't just useful for your custody and divorce protection anymore, Elena. If Victor really is stealing from the company, and if this can be proven, it could unravel everything Diane and Victor have built against you. 2 days later, Elena found herself near Nathaniel's office building, not by plan but by circumstance. She had a meeting with a client whose office happened to sit directly across the street, and as she left the building afterward, she saw him, Victor Lang, standing outside the glass entrance of Nathaniel's company, speaking into his phone with the same tense expression Julian had described. Elena froze on the sidewalk, half hidden behind a delivery truck, watching him pace back and forth, his free hand running through his hair in obvious agitation. She could not hear the words, but she could read the body language clearly enough. Whatever conversation he was having, it was not going well. He ended the call abruptly, shoving the phone into his pocket, and for a brief moment, his eyes swept across the street and landed directly on her. Elena's heart stopped. For a second, neither of them moved. Then Victor's expression shifted, smoothing over into something practiced and pleasant, the same easy charm she remembered from company dinners. Elena. He crossed the street toward her, hands in his pockets, his voice carrying none of the tension she had just witnessed. I heard about you and Nathaniel. I'm sorry, things have been difficult. Are you? She said carefully, studying his face for any crack in the composure. Of course. You two always seemed happy together. He tilted his head slightly. Is there anything I can do? Any way I can help smooth things over between you two? Nathaniel values my opinion. Perhaps I could talk to him. The offer, on the surface, sounded generous, but something in the way he said it, the eagerness beneath the polite concern, sent a warning through Elena's instincts. A man who wanted to help repair a marriage did not typically look so relieved at the prospect of that marriage remaining broken. That's kind of you to offer, Elena said, keeping her voice light, giving nothing away. But I think this is something Nathaniel and I need to work through ourselves. Of course, Victor said smoothly. Whatever you think is best. Take care of yourself, Elena. His eyes flicked briefly, almost imperceptibly, toward her stomach before returning to her face. In your condition, stress isn't good for you. The comment lingered strangely in the air after he walked away, disappearing back into the building. Elena stood on the sidewalk for a long moment, replaying the brief exchange in her mind. He knew about the pregnancy. Of course he did. Gossip traveled fast in tight social circles, but something about the way he had said it, the way his eyes had moved so deliberately toward her stomach, felt less like casual awareness and more like calculation. She called Priya the moment she reached her car, recounting every detail of the encounter. He offered to help smooth things over? Priya's voice sharpened with suspicion. That's exactly what someone would say if they wanted to appear helpful while making sure nothing actually changes. He's testing you, Elena, trying to see how much you know, how much of a threat you actually are. I think you're right, Elena said, her hands still faintly trembling on the steering wheel. And if he's worried enough to test me directly, that tells me we're getting closer to something real. Then we move faster, Priya said, before he decides you're enough of a threat to do something more than just ask polite questions on a sidewalk. But Nathaniel still believes I betrayed him, Elena said quietly. Even if I expose Victor's theft, that doesn't automatically prove my innocence to him. He still needs to see the truth for himself. Then we make sure he does, Priya said firmly. Piece by piece, until there's nothing left for him to doubt. That night, Elena sat by the window of Priya's apartment, watching the city lights flicker below, one hand resting gently on her stomach, where her child continued growing, unaware of the storm being carefully dismantled around them. She thought about Nathaniel, about the man she still loved despite everything, about the moment he might finally see the truth clearly enough to recognize how badly he had been used by the people closest to him. She did not know when that moment would come, but she knew now, with a certainty that steadied her through the exhaustion and grief, that it was coming. Piece by piece, the truth was assembling itself into something undeniable, and when it was finished, no amount of cold words or cruel accusations would be able to stand against it. She closed her eyes and allowed herself, for the first time in 2 weeks, a small measure of hope. Before sleep finally claimed her that night, Elena found herself thinking about the version of her life she had imagined only weeks earlier, a peaceful pregnancy, a supportive husband, a nursery slowly taking shape in the room down the hall from their bedroom. That version felt distant now, replaced by something harder, sharper, forged in the fire of betrayal and doubt. Yet strangely, she did not feel diminished by the change. If anything, she felt more herself than she had in months, as though the crisis had stripped away layers of politeness and passivity she had not realized she was carrying. revealing underneath a woman capable of fighting for what belonged to her. She thought of her own mother, gone now for several years, who had always told her that true strength revealed itself not in comfortable times but in difficult ones, when a person was forced to choose between shrinking away from pain or standing firmly inside it. Elena had chosen to stand. Whatever came next, whatever Victor and Diane had built against her, she would meet it head-on, with evidence in hand and truth on her side. The rumors reached Elena before the week was over. A former colleague messaged her, gently, carefully, letting her know that whispers had begun circulating through the social circles she and Nathaniel once shared. Stories about an affair, vague and unconfirmed but growing more detailed with each retelling, as though someone were feeding the gossip mill fresh material every few days to keep the story alive. "It's Diane," Priya said flatly when Elena showed her the messages. "This has her fingerprints all over it. She's not just defending Nathaniel's decision anymore. She's actively building a public case against you." Elena felt something harden inside her, replacing the raw grief of the past weeks with something closer to cold resolve. "She wants me isolated. If everyone believes I cheated, no one will question Nathaniel's decision to leave me. No one will ask why he decided so quickly, so coldly, without ever asking for my side. And if Victor's theft ever comes to light," Priya added, "a wife with a ruined reputation makes a much less credible witness than one with an intact one." The calculation of it all left Elena feeling sick. Two people she had once trusted, one through marriage and one through years of friendly business dinners, working together, whether directly coordinated or simply serving each other's separate interests, to destroy her credibility before she could ever use it against them. That evening, Elena received a call from an unexpected source, her old design mentor, a woman named Fiona Bellwether, who had taught her the fundamentals of interior architecture years before Elena had ever met Nathaniel. "I heard some things at a dinner party last week," Fiona said carefully. "I wanted to check on you directly, rather than believe whatever people are saying." "Thank you," Elena said, grateful for the small kindness in a week that had offered so few. "It's not true, Fiona, none of it. I've never been unfaithful to Nathaniel, not once." "I believed that the moment I heard the rumors," Fiona said firmly. "I've known you for years, Elena. This isn't who you are, but I'll be honest. The rumors are spreading fast, and they're detailed. Someone is putting real effort into making them sound believable." After the call ended, Elena sat with Priya in heavy silence, both of them absorbing the scope of what they were facing. This was no longer simply a marital dispute to be settled quietly between two people. This had become a coordinated campaign, public and deliberate, designed to strip Elena of her credibility before she could mount any real defense. "We need to find the text exchange," Priya said suddenly. Julian mentioned Victor was on the phone talking about timing working out perfectly. If Victor communicated with anyone about planting this rumor, about influencing Diane, there might be a digital trail somewhere. "How would we even find that?" Elena asked. Priya hesitated, clearly weighing something in her mind. "I have a friend who works in IT security. Completely above board, nothing illegal, but she's good at finding information that companies think is hidden. I could ask her to look into whether Victor's company email or messaging system shows any unusual activity around the time all of this started." "Do it," Elena said without hesitation. "Whatever it takes to find the truth." Elena spent the following 2 days trying to trace the origin of the rumors herself, reaching out carefully to people within her old social circle who might know where the story had first surfaced. A pattern began to emerge. The rumor had not spread organically through casual gossip, the way these things usually did, starting small and growing through repetition. Instead, it seemed to have appeared almost simultaneously across several unconnected social groups within the span of a single weekend, as though someone had deliberately seeded it in multiple places at once to ensure it would take root quickly and be difficult to trace back to a single source. "That's not how rumors normally spread," Fiona told her during a second phone call, her voice thoughtful. "Usually there's one person, one conversation, and it spreads outward slowly. This sounds coordinated. Someone wanted this story everywhere at once." The observation confirmed what Elena had already begun to suspect. This was not simple gossip fueled by genuine belief. This was strategy, executed with the same careful precision Victor apparently applied to moving money quietly through hidden accounts. She thought about confronting Diane directly, showing up at her mother-in-law's home and demanding answers face-to-face, but Carol had advised strongly against it during their most recent meeting. "Anything you say to Diane without documentation could be twisted and used against you," Carol warned. "If she's coordinating with Victor, or even acting alone out of malice, a heated confrontation gives her ammunition to paint you as unstable, erratic, Someone whose word cannot be trusted. Stay measured. Stay documented. Let the evidence speak instead of your emotions, however justified those emotions might be. It was difficult advice to follow. Every instinct in Elena wanted to march into Diane's pristine, judgmental living room and demand the truth be spoken aloud. Wanted to watch her mother-in-law's composed mask crack under the weight of direct confrontation. But she trusted Carol's judgment, trusted that patience would ultimately serve her better than the temporary satisfaction of a heated argument that would only be used against her later. Instead, she channeled her energy into supporting Priya's investigation, spending hours each evening cross-referencing dates, compiling documents, building a timeline so thorough and precise that no reasonable person could look at it and still believe the affair accusation held any weight. 3 days later, Priya's contact came back with something, not a complete confession, but a fragment, a screenshot of a group message thread within the company's internal communication system that had been shared inappropriately by a junior employee who had grown uncomfortable with what he had witnessed and wanted someone trustworthy to know. The message, sent from Victor's account roughly 1 week before Elena's confrontation with Nathaniel, read simply, "Need Nathaniel distracted before the audit review next month. Personal matters work best. Following up separately." It was not definitive proof of an affair rumor being fabricated. It did not explicitly mention Elena by name, but combined with everything else, the timing, Victor's odd behavior, his strange comment on the sidewalk about her condition and stress, it painted a picture too specific to dismiss as coincidence. "An audit review," Elena said slowly, reading the message again. "That confirms it. Something in the company's finances is about to be examined, and Victor needed a distraction significant enough to keep Nathaniel from paying close attention." "And what's more distracting to a man than believing his pregnant wife betrayed him?" Priya said grimly. Elena felt tears sting her eyes, not entirely from sadness this time, but from a strange, sharp anger at how easily she had been used as a tool in someone else's scheme. Her marriage, her pregnancy, her entire life had been treated as a convenient distraction, a piece to be moved on someone else's board without any consideration for the damage it would cause. "This still isn't enough," Priya said carefully, watching Elena's expression shift from grief to fury. "It doesn't prove Diane's involvement directly, and it doesn't explicitly prove the affair rumor was fabricated. We need more before we can bring this to Nathaniel or to Carol." "Then we get more," Elena said, wiping her eyes and straightening her shoulders. "I'm done being someone else's convenient distraction." Over the following days, Elena's resolve hardened into careful, methodical action. She met with Carol again, sharing the screenshot and the pattern of financial transfers Priya's accounting contact had identified. Carol listened carefully, taking detailed notes, her expression growing increasingly serious as the picture assembled itself. "This is significant," Carol said finally. "Not conclusive on its own, but significant. If we can establish a clear connection between Victor's financial activity and the timing of your marital breakdown, that strengthens your position considerably, both for any divorce proceedings and potentially for a separate legal matter regarding the company's finances, should Nathaniel choose to pursue that once he learns the truth." "If he learns the truth," Elena said quietly. "He hasn't spoken to me in weeks, Carol. I don't know if he'll even listen when the moment comes." "He'll have to," Carol said firmly. "Truth has a way of forcing itself into rooms people would rather keep it out of, especially when there's enough evidence behind it. Give it time, Elena. You're closer than you realize." That night, walking back to Priya's apartment through the cool evening air, Elena allowed herself a moment to simply breathe, to feel the weight of the past few weeks settle into something she could carry, rather than something crushing her entirely. She placed a hand over her stomach, feeling the small, steady reminder of the life growing there, a life that deserved a mother who fought for the truth, rather than one who disappeared quietly under the weight of false accusations. Her phone buzzed as she walked, a message from Diane this time, brief and cutting. "I've heard you've been asking questions around the office. I'd advise you to focus on your own reputation, rather than digging into matters that don't concern you." Elena stopped walking, reading the message twice, feeling a strange calm settle over her instead of the fear the words were clearly meant to provoke. Diane's anxiety was showing through the threat. People who felt secure in their position did not send warnings like this. She typed back a single response before continuing her walk home. "Everything that affects my child concerns me, Diane, including the truth about who destroyed their parents' marriage, and why." She did not wait for a reply. She simply put the phone away, tightened her coat against the evening chill, and continued walking toward the small apartment that had become her temporary refuge. Back at the apartment, Priya was waiting with news of her own. Her IT contact had discovered something further, a login record showing that Victor had accessed certain restricted financial folders late at night on multiple occasions over the past 2 months, well outside his usual working hours, and always shortly before the unexplained transfers appeared in the smaller development accounts. "This is starting to look less like a theory and more like a case," Priya said, spreading printed pages across the kitchen table. "If we can connect this pattern to an actual audit, if we can show a real financial investigator these dates alongside the transfer amounts, this becomes very difficult for Victor to explain away as routine business activity." Elena studied the pages carefully, her mind working through the implications. Carol mentioned the company has an internal audit coming up next month. If Victor knew about that audit in advance and needed time to either cover his tracks or create enough chaos that nobody would look closely at the numbers, that explains the timing perfectly. He didn't just want a distraction, he needed one, urgently, before that audit began. "Which means," Priya said, "he's probably getting more desperate as the audit date approaches, not less. People who feel cornered make mistakes. We should watch closely over the next few weeks." Elena nodded, exhaustion and determination warring inside her in equal measure. She thought of the child growing steadily within her, of the nursery she still had not allowed herself to fully imagine again since that terrible night, of the marriage she still hoped, somewhere beneath the anger and hurt, might be worth saving once the truth finally came to light. "We're close," she said quietly, more to herself than to Priya. "I can feel it. Whatever Victor is hiding, whatever role Diane played in helping bury it, it's all going to come apart soon. And when it does, Nathaniel is going to have to face exactly what his coldness cost him." Priya reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "And when he does, you'll be ready, standing on solid ground, with proof in hand, instead of begging to be believed." Elena managed a tired but genuine smile, the first in what felt like a very long time. "I'm done begging," she said. "From now on, I'm simply going to be right, and let the evidence do the rest of the work for me." Outside the window, the city continued its steady evening rhythm, indifferent to the quiet battle being fought within one small apartment. But inside, 2 women sat surrounded by papers and printed records, slowly assembling the pieces of a truth that would soon prove impossible for anyone to ignore any longer. Elena thought back to the woman who had walked out of Nathaniel's home weeks earlier, suitcase in hand, uncertain of anything except her own innocence. That woman had felt powerless, adrift, at the mercy of decisions made entirely by other people. The woman sitting at this kitchen table now, surrounded by evidence she had gathered through her own persistence and determination, felt entirely different. She was no longer simply reacting to what had been done to her. She was actively reshaping the outcome, piece by careful piece, refusing to let anyone else write the ending of her story without her input. "Whatever happens with Nathaniel," she said quietly to Priya, "I think I've learned something important through all of this. I don't need him or anyone else to hand me my strength. I can build it myself, brick by brick, the same way I've been building this case." Priya smiled softly, squeezing her friend's hand once more. "You already had that strength, Elena. This whole ordeal just gave you the chance to finally see it clearly." The formal letter from Dr. Voss arrived on a Tuesday morning, thick with medical detail, timelines, and official letterhead, exactly as promised. Elena read through it twice at Priya's kitchen table, her hands steady this time instead of trembling. Every date was accounted for, every measurement recorded. The letter stated plainly, in language no lawyer could easily dispute, that conception had occurred during a specific window that aligned precisely with the days Nathaniel had been present, not absent, not traveling, not anywhere near Denver or Chicago. It was undeniable proof, delivered in the calm, clinical language of medical science. "This is it," Carol said when Elena brought the letter to her office later that day. "Combined with what you and Priya have gathered about Victor's activity, and the pattern around Diane's involvement, we have more than enough to move forward decisively. The question now is how you want to proceed." "I want to confront them," Elena said, her voice firm despite the nerves fluttering beneath her composure. "All of it. Diane, the rumors, Victor's theft. I want Nathaniel to see the full picture at once, not scattered pieces he can dismiss individually." Carol considered this carefully. "That's reasonable, but it needs to be done strategically. A public confrontation could work in your favor if handled correctly, especially given how publicly Diane has damaged your reputation. Sometimes the same visibility used against someone can be turned to expose the truth just as effectively." In the days before the confrontation, Elena found herself unexpectedly nervous, more nervous than she had felt at any point since the night Nathaniel had thrown her out. It was one thing to gather evidence quietly, methodically, from the safety of Priya's apartment. It was another thing entirely to stand in front of the people who had wronged her and lay that evidence bare for everyone to witness at once. What if he doesn't believe me? Elena asked Priya one evening, staring at the folder of documents spread across the kitchen table. What if he sees all of this and still finds some way to doubt me? Then that tells you everything you need to know about whether he deserves a second chance, Priya said firmly. But Elena, look at what you've built here. Medical documentation, financial records, a direct message from Victor's own account. This isn't speculation anymore. This is proof. Solid enough to stand up anywhere, in front of anyone. Elena nodded, though the nervousness did not fully leave her. She thought about the version of herself who had walked out of that house weeks earlier, with nothing but a suitcase and a shattered heart, and how far she had come since then, transforming grief into determination, determination into evidence, evidence into a case strong enough to expose the truth to an entire room of witnesses at once. She also thought carefully about Nathaniel, about the complicated tangle of anger and lingering love she still carried for him. Exposing Victor and Diane would prove her innocence beyond doubt, but it would not automatically repair what had broken between her and her husband. That would require something else entirely, something she was not yet certain he was capable of giving. They spent the next several days planning carefully. Carol suggested a family gathering already scheduled for that weekend, a dinner at Diane's home to celebrate an unrelated occasion, one that Elena had originally been uninvited to following the scandal, but which Nathaniel's younger cousin, sympathetic to Elena's situation, agreed to help her attend as a guest. The evening of the dinner arrived with a tension Elena could feel in her chest long before she reached the house. She stood outside the familiar front door, the same door she had walked through countless times over the past 2 years, now feeling like the entrance to enemy territory rather than family gathering. Priya waited in the car nearby, ready to provide support if needed, while Elena carried a folder containing copies of every piece of evidence they had gathered, organized carefully by Carol's guidance. She knocked. The door opened to reveal Diane's shocked expression, quickly masked by forced politeness for the sake of the other guests visible behind her in the elegant dining room. "Elena, I wasn't expecting you." "I imagine not," Elena said calmly, stepping past her into the house before Diane could object. "But I think it's time we all had an honest conversation." Conversations paused around the room as Elena entered. Nathaniel sat near the head of the table, his expression shifting rapidly from shock to something harder to read as their eyes met for the first time in weeks. Victor sat further down the table, his easy smile faltering slightly at the sight of her. "Elena, this isn't the time," Nathaniel said, standing abruptly, his voice low with warning. "I think it's exactly the time," Elena said, setting the folder down on the table with deliberate calm. "Because I'm tired of being accused of betraying you while the actual betrayal happens right in front of everyone, hidden in plain sight." "What are you talking about?" Nathaniel demanded, though something in his voice had already begun to waver. Elena opened the folder and began laying documents across the table, one by one, while the room watched in stunned silence. "This is a letter from my obstetrician, confirming through medical documentation that our baby was conceived during the exact week you were home. Not traveling, not Denver, not Chicago. Home. With me." Nathaniel stared at the letter, his jaw tight, saying nothing. "This," Elena continued, placing the next document down, "is a record of financial transfers moving out of the company's development accounts into a private holding company over the past several months. Transfers made by someone with high-level access, someone like Victor." A sharp intake of breath came from somewhere near the table. Victor's face had gone pale, his easy charm entirely vanished now. "This is absurd," Victor said, though his voice lacked its usual confidence. "You're grasping at anything to save your marriage." "Am I?" Elena turned to face him directly. "Because I also have a message from your own company account, sent 1 week before Nathaniel accused me of infidelity, discussing the need to keep him distracted before an upcoming audit review. Personal matters work best, you wrote, following up separately." The color drained further from Victor's face. Around the table, family members who had gathered for a pleasant celebratory dinner now sat frozen, watching a very different kind of drama unfold in front of them. "Nathaniel," Elena said, turning to her husband, her voice softening slightly despite everything. "Someone needed you distracted enough not to notice what was happening in the company's finances. What could distract you more than believing your pregnant wife had betrayed you? It wasn't a coincidence that this accusation came exactly when it did. It was designed." Nathaniel's eyes moved slowly between Elena, Victor, and finally his mother. whose composed expression had begun to crack visibly under the weight of the room's collective attention. "Diane," he said slowly, his voice carrying a warning she had likely never heard directed at her before. "Did you know about this?" "I don't know what she's talking about," Diane said quickly, too quickly, her voice pitched higher than usual. "She called me," Elena said. "The day after you threw me out. She threatened me, told me to consider my position carefully before making accusations I couldn't prove. Funny thing to say to someone who had done nothing wrong, unless you already knew there was something worth protecting." The room had gone completely silent now, every eye fixed on Diane, whose carefully maintained composure finally began to fully unravel. "I only wanted what was best for my son," Diane said, her voice trembling now, defensive rather than commanding. "I never wanted him tied to someone who could ruin everything he's built." "By helping Victor plant lies about me?" Elena asked, her voice steady despite the emotion building inside her. "By spreading rumors through our entire social circle, timed perfectly to destroy my credibility right when I needed people to believe me?" "I didn't create those rumors," Diane said, though her denial sounded weak even to her own ears. "I simply didn't discourage them when they started. If people wanted to believe you were unfaithful, that wasn't my doing." "But you knew they weren't true," Elena said quietly. "And you let them spread anyway, because it served your purposes just as well as it served Victor's." Nathaniel had gone very still, his eyes fixed on his mother, with an expression Elena had never seen him wear before, a mixture of disbelief and something close to grief. "You let me believe my wife had cheated on me," he said slowly. "You let me throw her out of our home, pregnant, alone, believing a lie you knew wasn't true." "Nathaniel," Diane started, but he raised a hand, cutting her off. "How long?" he demanded, turning back to Victor now, his voice rising with barely controlled fury. "How long have you been stealing from the company?" Victor's composure had entirely collapsed. "It wasn't stealing," he said weakly. "It was borrowing. I intended to pay it back before anyone noticed." "You needed me distracted before the audit," Nathaniel said, the pieces clearly assembling themselves rapidly in his mind now. "You needed me too consumed with personal chaos to review the finances closely. So you fed my mother's existing dislike of Elena, or worked with her directly, I don't yet know which, and together you destroyed my marriage to protect your theft." "Nathaniel, please, let me explain," Victor said, standing now, his voice pleading. "Sit down," Nathaniel said, his voice carrying a coldness Elena recognized, though this time it was not directed at her. "You'll explain everything, in detail, to the company's auditors, and likely to the police, depending on what they find in those accounts." Victor sank back into his chair, all pretense of confidence gone, his hands shaking slightly as he stared at the table in front of him. Around the room, other family members exchanged uneasy glances, clearly uncertain whether to remain or excuse themselves quietly from a scene that had grown far beyond the pleasant dinner they had gathered for. "How much?" Nathaniel asked, his voice quieter now but no less intense. "How much did you take?" "I don't have the exact figure memorized," Victor admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "Find it," Nathaniel said, "because I promise you, the auditors will." He turned his attention back to his mother, who had sunk into her chair, her earlier composure entirely replaced by something smaller, more fragile than Elena had ever seen her display in 2 years of chilly interactions. "And you," Nathaniel said, "you watched me throw my pregnant wife out of our home. You watched me humiliate her, hurt her, based on a lie you either helped create or simply chose not to correct. Do you have any idea what that makes you complicit in?" "I was trying to protect you," Diane said, tears now visible in her eyes, though whether from genuine remorse or simply the shock of exposure, Elena could not tell. "I've always tried to protect you, Nathaniel. From the moment your father died, I promised myself I would look after your interests, make sure no one took advantage of you. By destroying the one relationship that actually made me happy," Nathaniel's voice cracked slightly, the first real vulnerability Elena had heard from him since that terrible night. "Elena never took advantage of me, Mother. She loved me. She still might, despite everything I've done, and you helped take that away from both of us for weeks over a lie." The room remained frozen, the celebratory dinner entirely forgotten as the true nature of the evening revealed itself. The room remained frozen, the celebratory dinner entirely forgotten as the true nature of the evening revealed itself. Nathaniel turned finally to Elena, his expression shifting from fury to something more complicated, guilt and grief tangled together with dawning understanding. "Elena," he said quietly, "I need to speak with you. Alone." Elena looked at him for a long moment, feeling the weight of everything that had happened over the past several weeks pressing down on her chest. Part of her wanted to walk away entirely, to let him sit with the consequences of his cruelty without offering him the comfort of an immediate conversation. But another part of her, the part that still remembered the man who used to leave notes in her coat pocket, wanted to hear what he had to say. "Not tonight," she said finally, gathering the documents carefully back into her folder. "Tonight, I want you to sit with what you've learned. I want you to understand fully what your coldness cost me, cost us, before we have any conversation about what comes next." She turned to leave, pausing briefly at the door to look back at the room, at Diane's crumbling composure, at Victor's pale, panicked expression, at Nathaniel standing motionless amid the wreckage of a scheme he had never seen coming. "I'll be in touch through my lawyer," she said. "When you're ready to talk honestly, Nathaniel, you know where to find me." She walked out into the cool evening air, Priya waiting anxiously by the car, and allowed herself, for the first time in weeks, to breathe freely. "How did it go?" Priya asked as Elena climbed into the passenger seat. "Exactly as it needed to," Elena said, resting her head back against the seat, exhaustion and relief washing over her in equal measure. "The truth is out now. Whatever happens next, at least the truth is finally out." As they drove away from the house, Elena watched the lights of the dining room flicker in the rearview mirror, imagining the chaos still unfolding inside, the accusations, the explanations, the slow unraveling of lies that had taken weeks to build and only minutes to destroy. For the first time since that terrible night in the kitchen, she felt something close to peace settle over her, fragile but real, the quiet satisfaction of a woman who had refused to disappear quietly, who had fought instead for the truth, and won. That night, back at Priya's apartment, her phone rang just after midnight. She stared at Nathaniel's name on the screen for a long moment, before finally letting it go to voicemail. She was not ready, not yet, to hear whatever he had to say. She wanted him to sit longer with the weight of what he had done, to fully absorb the consequences before she allowed herself to consider what, if anything, might come next between them. The following morning, Carol called with an update. News of the confrontation had apparently spread quickly through Nathaniel's professional circle, and the company's board had already begun an emergency review of Victor's financial activity, moving up the scheduled audit in light of the serious allegations raised the previous evening. "This moves fast once it starts," Carol said. "Victor will likely face criminal charges depending on what the audit uncovers. And frankly, Elena, your credibility in all of this has been restored almost instantly. People who heard the rumors are already hearing the truth now too. Reputations can be rebuilt, sometimes faster than we expect, when the evidence is this clear." Elena thanked her, then sat quietly by the window for a long while after the call ended, watching the city wake up beneath a soft morning light. She thought about the child growing inside her, about the nursery she could finally allow herself to imagine again, without the shadow of doubt hanging over it. She thought about Nathaniel, about the voicemail still waiting unheard on her phone, about whether the man she had married could ever fully earn back the trust his coldness had shattered. She did not have an answer yet, but for the first time in weeks, she felt strong enough to eventually find one, on her own terms, in her own time. 3 weeks passed before Elena finally listened to Nathaniel's voicemail. She had kept herself busy in the interim, focusing on her design work, attending prenatal appointments, allowing Priya's apartment to become a genuine home, rather than simply a temporary shelter. She had watched from a careful distance as news of Victor's arrest spread through the local business community, the audit uncovering far more significant theft than even Priya's initial findings had suggested. Nearly $200,000 moved quietly over the better part of a year. Diane, meanwhile, had gone quiet, her usual presence in social circles noticeably absent since the dinner party confrontation. Elena heard through mutual acquaintances that she had left the city temporarily, staying with relatives out of state, unable to face the fallout from her complicity in destroying her son's marriage. The social circle that had once so eagerly spread rumors about Elena's supposed infidelity now buzzed with an entirely different story, one that painted her as the wronged party who had uncovered a genuine financial crime through her own persistence and courage. Fiona called several times during those weeks, checking in gently, and other old friends who had distanced themselves during the height of the rumors slowly began reaching out again, some apologetic, some simply curious, all of them eager to hear the full story from Elena's own perspective. She found she did not particularly want to relive it publicly, preferring instead to focus her energy on healing, on the steady growth of the child inside her, on rebuilding a version of herself that felt whole, rather than constantly defending her own honesty to people who should never have doubted her in the first place. She gave brief, measured responses when asked, declined most invitations to discuss it further, and slowly, the story faded into the background hum of local gossip, replaced eventually by newer scandals, as these things always were. Priya remained a constant, steady presence throughout, never pushing Elena toward any particular decision about Nathaniel, simply offering support and honest perspective whenever Elena needed it. Their friendship, already strong before this crisis, deepened further through the shared experience of fighting for the truth together, a bond Elena knew would outlast whatever happened next in her marriage. When Elena finally pressed play on the voicemail, sitting alone in Priya's kitchen on a quiet Sunday morning, Nathaniel's voice sounded different than she remembered, stripped of its usual confidence, raw in a way she had rarely heard from him. "Elena, I don't know where to start, so I'll just start with the truth. I was wrong, completely wrong. Not just about the accusation, but about how I handled everything after. I threw you out without asking a single real question. I let my mother's fear and Victor's manipulation override 2 years of trust we built together. I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't even know if I deserve the chance to ask, but I need you to know that I understand now, fully, what my coldness cost us both. Please, when you're ready, let me have the chance to make this right." Elena sat with the message for a long time after it ended, tears slipping quietly down her cheeks, not entirely from sadness, but from the complicated tangle of emotions that came with finally hearing genuine remorse from the man she had loved. She called Priya into the kitchen and played the message again, watching her friend's expression carefully. "What do you think?" Elena asked. "I think it sounds sincere," Priya said carefully. "But sincere apologies mean nothing without sincere change behind them, Elena. You get to decide what that change needs to look like before you let him back into your life, if you decide to let him back in at all." Elena nodded, wiping her eyes. "I know. I'm not rushing into anything. But I think I'm ready to talk to him. Not to forgive everything immediately, just to talk." They arranged to meet at a quiet park near the apartment, neutral ground, somewhere that belonged to neither of their shared history, nor the home Elena had been forced to leave. Nathaniel arrived first, waiting on a bench beneath a large oak tree, and Elena watched him for a moment before approaching, studying the tired lines around his eyes, the way his shoulders sat lower than she remembered, as though the weight of the past few weeks had physically pressed down on him. "Thank you for coming," he said as she sat down, careful distance maintained between them on the bench. "I almost didn't," Elena said honestly. "Part of me wanted to let you sit with what you did a lot longer before I gave you the satisfaction of a conversation." "I understand that," he said quietly. "I probably deserve that." They sat in silence for a moment, the sounds of the park filling the space between them, children laughing somewhere in the distance, birds calling from the branches overhead. "I keep replaying that night," Nathaniel said finally. "The way you looked at me when I said those words. I've never seen you look so betrayed, so completely broken. And I did that to you. Not Victor, not my mother, me. I made the choice to believe them over you, without even giving you the chance to speak." "Why?" Elena asked, the question she had carried for weeks finally given voice. "After everything we built together, why did you believe them so easily?" Nathaniel was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the park before answering. "My mother has always had this way of getting inside my head, especially since my father died. Some part of me, some scared, insecure part I don't like admitting exists, has always wondered if I was worthy of what we had. If someone as talented, as beautiful, as genuinely good as you actually loved me for who I was, or for what I could provide." My mother knew exactly which insecurity to press, and Victor knew exactly when to press it. I let them, because some small, broken part of me was already primed to believe the worst. Elena absorbed this, feeling something in her chest loosen slightly despite herself. It did not excuse what he had done, but it helped her understand it, helped her see the wound beneath the cruelty, rather than simply the cruelty itself. "That insecurity isn't an excuse," she said carefully, "but I understand it's an explanation. There's a difference." "I know," Nathaniel said. "I'm not asking you to excuse it. I'm asking for the chance to prove, through actions and not words, that I've learned from it, that I'll never let anyone, including my own fear, override my trust in you again." "What does that look like, practically?" Elena asked. "Because I need more than promises, Nathaniel. I needed more than promises before, and look what happened." She thought of all the nights she had spent on Priya's couch, staring at the ceiling, wondering how a marriage that had seemed so solid could collapse so completely in the span of a single conversation. She thought of the suitcase waiting by the door, packed and ready as though he had anticipated needing it, as though some part of him had already decided her guilt, before she had even walked through the door with her joyful news. Promises alone would never be enough to erase that memory. Only sustained, visible change could begin to do that. I understand if words feel meaningless to you right now, Nathaniel said, watching her carefully. I would feel the same way in your position. That's why I don't expect you to simply take my word for any of this. I want you to watch. Over the next weeks, months, however long it takes, watch what I actually do, not what I say I'll do. If the actions don't match, you'll have every right to walk away completely, and I won't fight you on it. I've already started, he said. I've cut off contact with my mother until she's willing to genuinely account for her role in what happened, not just apologize for getting caught. I've cooperated fully with the police investigation into Victor, provided every piece of documentation they've needed. I've also started seeing a therapist, someone who specializes in family trauma, to actually work through why I was so susceptible to believing the worst about the people who love me. The list surprised her, the concrete nature of it, the willingness to take real, uncomfortable action rather than simply offering empty apologies. That's a start, she said carefully. But it's still just a start. I know, Nathaniel said. I'm prepared to keep proving it, for as long as it takes. Even if that means you never fully trust me again. Even if this ends with us as separated parents rather than a reunited couple, I need you to know that I will show up for our child, and I will spend the rest of my life trying to earn back even a fraction of the trust I destroyed. Elena studied his face carefully, searching for the practiced performance she had learned to recognize from Victor and Diane, the calculated words designed to achieve a specific outcome. She found none of it. What she found instead was raw, uncomfortable honesty, the kind that came only from someone who had truly confronted the depth of their own failure. I'm not ready to move back in, she said finally. I'm not ready to call this fixed, or even close to fixed. But I am willing to let you prove yourself, slowly, on my terms, not yours. Relief flooded across Nathaniel's face, tempered by the clear understanding that this was not forgiveness, not yet, only the possibility of a path toward it. Whatever terms you need, he said, I'll follow them completely. Over the following months, Nathaniel did exactly that. He attended every prenatal appointment Elena allowed him to join, sitting quietly in waiting rooms, never pushing for more closeness than she offered. He continued therapy, sometimes sharing small insights with her when she asked, never forcing the conversation when she didn't. He handled the legal proceedings against Victor with the company's lawyers, ensuring every dollar possible was recovered, using the experience to overhaul the company's financial oversight so thoroughly that similar theft would be nearly impossible in the future. Diane, for her part, remained largely absent from Elena's life, though Nathaniel mentioned occasionally that she had begun her own therapy as well, slowly working through the grief and fear that had driven her to such destructive choices. Elena remained cautious about any future relationship with her mother-in-law, unwilling to rush forgiveness simply because time had passed, but she appreciated that Nathaniel no longer excused his mother's behavior the way he once might have. There were setbacks along the way, moments that tested the fragile progress they had made. One evening, Nathaniel arrived late to dinner without calling ahead, and Elena felt the old panic rise sharply in her chest, memories of unexplained absences and late business trips flooding back before she could stop them. When he finally arrived, apologetic and explaining a meeting that had run long, she found herself unable to fully shake the anxiety for the rest of the evening. I need you to understand, she told him later that night, her voice tight with the effort of articulating the fear honestly. It's not really about tonight. It's about every unexplained absence suddenly feeling like evidence again. I don't know if that feeling ever fully goes away. Then I'll call every time, Nathaniel said without hesitation. Every single time, even if it feels excessive. I'd rather over-communicate for the rest of our lives than let you sit alone with that kind of fear again. He kept that promise consistently in the weeks that followed, small check-in messages arriving throughout his workday, nothing demanding a response, simply quiet reassurance that he remained exactly where he said he would be. It was a small thing, but small things, repeated consistently over time, began to rebuild something Elena had feared might never be rebuilt at all. Nathaniel also invited Elena to join a handful of his therapy sessions during her second trimester, not to relive the betrayal in detail, but to better understand the patterns that had made him vulnerable to it in the first place. Sitting in the small, quiet office across from a calm, observant therapist, Elena learned things about her husband she had never fully understood in 2 years of marriage. The weight he had carried since his father's death, the quiet fear of inadequacy his mother had planted in him from childhood without ever fully realizing the damage it caused. I'm not sharing this to excuse what I did, Nathaniel said during one particularly difficult session. his voice raw with vulnerability she had rarely seen from him before their crisis. "I'm sharing it because I want you to understand the roots of my weakness, so you can watch for whether I'm actually pulling them out or simply hiding them better." Elena appreciated the honesty, even when it was difficult to hear, even when old anger flared briefly at the reminder of everything his weakness had cost her. Slowly, session by session, she began to see not just the man who had hurt her, but the fuller picture of who he was, flawed and imperfect but genuinely working to become someone more worthy of the trust she had once given so freely. Slowly, carefully, month by month, Elena found herself trusting Nathaniel again, not blindly, not completely, but genuinely, built on the accumulated weight of consistent action rather than empty promises. She moved back into their home 4 months into the pregnancy, though she insisted on redecorating the nursery entirely herself, a small but significant assertion of the independence she had discovered within herself during the weeks she had spent fighting for the truth. She chose the colors carefully, soft yellow walls that reminded her of the hope she had carried on the very first day she discovered she was pregnant, before everything had unraveled so painfully. She selected furniture piece by piece, a rocking chair positioned by the window exactly where she had once imagined it during those long, difficult nights on Priya's couch, determined that this room, at least, would be built entirely on her own terms, untouched by anyone else's doubt or interference. Nathaniel offered to help several times, and each time, Elena gently but firmly declined, needing this one space to remain hers alone, a quiet symbol of the strength she had rediscovered through the hardest weeks of her life. The final confirmation came during her 7th month, when Nathaniel accompanied her to a routine appointment, and Dr. Voss showed them both the latest ultrasound images, the baby's features becoming clearer with each passing week. "Would you like to know the gender?" Dr. Voss asked, and Elena looked at Nathaniel, offering him the choice for the first time since the pregnancy began, a small gesture of trust she had withheld carefully until this moment. "Together," Nathaniel said softly, taking Elena's hand, and she did not pull away. "A girl," Dr. Voss confirmed, smiling at the quiet emotion passing between them. Nathaniel's eyes filled with tears, and for the first time since that terrible night in the kitchen, Elena saw the man she had originally fallen in love with fully present again. No walls, no coldness, just genuine overwhelming emotion at the reality of the daughter they would soon welcome into the world. "I promise you," he said quietly, looking at Elena rather than the screen, "she will never once doubt how much she is loved. Neither will you, for as long as I live." Elena squeezed his hand gently, still cautious, still healing, but no longer standing entirely alone in the fight to build a life worth trusting again. A year had passed since the night Nathaniel's cold words shattered Elena's world, and standing in the nursery now, watching morning light spill across the soft yellow walls she had chosen herself, Elena found it almost difficult to recognize the woman she had been that night, suitcase in hand, standing alone on a dark street with nothing but a growing certainty that she would find the truth no matter the cost. Their daughter, Amelia, slept peacefully in her crib nearby, one small hand curled near her face, entirely unaware of the storm her arrival had first walked into, entirely secure now in a home rebuilt on something far sturdier than the illusion of stability Elena had once mistaken for real trust. Nathaniel appeared in the doorway, still in his pajamas, coffee in hand, watching his wife and daughter with the quiet, unguarded expression that had become familiar to Elena over the past year, so different from the cold, distant stranger who had once stood in their kitchen and destroyed her world with 6 devastating words. "She slept through the night again," he said softly, careful not to wake the baby. "3rd time this week." "Don't jinx it," Elena whispered back, smiling despite herself. They stood together for a moment, watching their daughter sleep, and Elena allowed herself to fully feel the strange, complicated gratitude that came with surviving something so painful and finding, against all reasonable expectation, something genuinely good on the other side of it. The past year had not been simple. Rebuilding trust rarely was. There had been moments of doubt, small triggers that brought old fears rushing back unexpectedly, difficult conversations that stretched late into the night as they worked through the wreckage Diane and Victor had left behind. But there had also been steady, consistent proof, month after month, that Nathaniel meant what he said in that quiet park conversation nearly a year earlier. He had continued therapy long after the initial crisis passed, working through not just the specific betrayal that had almost destroyed his marriage, but the deeper insecurities that had made him vulnerable to it in the first place. He had rebuilt the company's financial oversight so thoroughly that industry publications occasionally referenced his reforms as a model for preventing similar internal theft. He had shown up, consistently, reliably, For every appointment, every late-night worry, every small moment that mattered in building a family together. Victor's case had concluded in the spring, a plea deal resulting in significant prison time and a court order for full financial restitution, though recovering every dollar had proven difficult given how thoroughly he had hidden portions of the stolen funds. Elena had testified briefly during the proceedings, her medical documentation and the digital evidence Priya's contact had uncovered playing a central role in establishing the timeline of his deception. Sitting in that courtroom, watching Victor's shoulders slump as the judge read out the sentence, Elena had felt an unexpected wave of complicated emotion, not quite satisfaction, not quite sympathy, but something closer to closure. This was the man who had treated her marriage as a convenient tool, who had watched her pack a suitcase and leave her home without a flicker of guilt, all to buy himself a few more months of hidden theft. Watching him finally face consequences for that calculated cruelty felt less like triumph and more like the quiet closing of a door that had been left painfully open for far too long. Julian, Nathaniel's assistant, had eventually been promoted for his quiet integrity throughout the ordeal, a small but meaningful acknowledgement of the courage it had taken to share what he overheard, despite the risk to his own position. Elena made a point of thanking him personally, bringing him a small gift after Amelia's birth, grateful for the young man who had trusted his conscience over his comfort. Diane's path had been quieter, slower, marked by genuine effort that Elena had watched with cautious, evolving respect. She had spent months in therapy, had written Elena a long, carefully considered letter of apology that acknowledged specific harm rather than offering vague, defensive regret. She had asked for nothing in return, simply stated that she understood if Elena never wanted a relationship with her again, and that she would respect whatever boundary Elena chose to set. It had taken Elena several more months to decide what that boundary would look like. Eventually, cautiously, she had allowed Diane back into their lives in a limited capacity. Supervised visits at first, brief and carefully monitored, gradually expanding as trust, slowly, imperfectly rebuilt itself. Diane had been a doting, careful presence during Amelia's first months, clearly grateful for every small opportunity to be included, never pushing for more closeness than Elena offered. There had been one particular afternoon, months earlier, when Diane had broken down entirely during a supervised visit, setting the baby bottle aside with trembling hands, and finally saying the words Elena had waited months to hear without prompting or performance behind them. "I was so afraid of losing my son that I nearly destroyed the family he actually wanted," Diane had said, tears streaming freely down her face. "I told myself I was protecting him, but really, I was protecting my own fear of becoming irrelevant in his life. That's not an excuse. I know it's not an excuse. I just needed you to know I finally understand that." Elena had not offered immediate forgiveness that day, had simply nodded and allowed the moment to exist without demanding more from either of them than honesty. But something had shifted after that conversation, a small crack of genuine understanding opening between two women who had spent 2 years locked in quiet, unspoken hostility. "I never thought I'd say this," Elena told Priya one afternoon, watching Diane carefully feed Amelia a bottle in the living room while Nathaniel worked in his home office nearby. "But I think she's actually trying, genuinely trying." "People can change," Priya said, settling onto the couch beside her old friend, their friendship as strong as ever despite the very different directions their lives had taken since that terrible night on the phone when Elena had called asking for somewhere to stay. Not everyone, not always. But some people, when they're forced to confront the real cost of their choices, actually do the work to become someone better. They sat together for a while, watching Amelia finish her bottle in Diane's careful arms, the quiet domestic scene a world away from the tension and suspicion that had once defined every interaction between the two women. Priya glanced at Elena, a knowing smile crossing her face. "Do you remember that first night, when you called me at midnight asking for somewhere to stay?" Priya asked. "I don't think either of us could have imagined we'd end up here, a year later, watching things heal this much." "I couldn't have imagined any of it," Elena admitted. "Not the confrontation at the dinner party, not Victor's arrest, not Diane actually trying, genuinely trying, to become someone Amelia could trust. I think if you had told me that night, standing on the street with my suitcase, that this is where we'd end up, I wouldn't have believed you. But here we are," Priya said simply, and Elena nodded, feeling the truth of it settle warmly in her chest. Elena's design career had flourished in the years since the crisis, ironically boosted by the very public nature of her ordeal. Clients admired her resilience, her quiet strength throughout a genuinely difficult situation, and referrals had increased steadily, as her reputation solidified around both her talent and her character. She had taken on fewer projects during the final months of pregnancy and the early months with Amelia, but had recently begun accepting new clients again, carefully balancing her career with the demands of new motherhood. Nathaniel had insisted on adjusting his own work schedule significantly, delegating more responsibility to trusted staff, ensuring he was present for as much of Amelia's early life as possible. The late nights that had once defined his career had become rare exceptions rather than the constant norm, a deliberate choice he had made and maintained consistently enough that Elena no longer flinched at the mention of a demanding week ahead. That evening, after Amelia had been fed, bathed, and finally settled into a deep sleep, Elena and Nathaniel sat together on their back porch, the same porch where they had once shared quiet evenings early in their marriage before everything had unraveled so suddenly. The city lights spread out below them, familiar and beautiful, a view Elena had once feared she would never see from this particular angle again. "Do you ever think about that night?" Nathaniel asked quietly, watching the horizon. "The one in the kitchen?" "Sometimes," Elena admitted. "Less than I used to. It doesn't feel like it defines us anymore, not the way it once did. It feels more like something we survived together, even though you were the one who caused it." "I'll carry the guilt of that night for the rest of my life," Nathaniel said. "Not in a way that consumes me anymore, but in a way that reminds me constantly of what I almost lost through my own weakness. Every time I look at Amelia, every time I look at you, I remember exactly how close I came to losing this entirely." Elena reached over and took his hand, the gesture natural now, familiar, rebuilt through hundreds of small, consistent moments over the past year. "You didn't lose it," she said. "You almost did, but you didn't. And what we have now, I think, might actually be stronger than what we had before, precisely because we know now what it costs to lose it." Nathaniel brought her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss against her fingers, his eyes carrying the same raw honesty she had learned to trust again over the course of this difficult, transformative year. "I love you," he said simply. "More than I knew how to show that night, more than I probably still know how to fully show now, but I promise you, every single day, I'll keep trying to prove it." Inside the house, a soft cry rose from the baby monitor, Amelia stirring briefly before settling back into sleep. Elena smiled, standing to check on her daughter, pausing at the door to look back at her husband, sitting quietly in the evening light, a man who had once broken her heart completely, and had spent an entire year proving, patiently and consistently, that he was capable of rebuilding what he had broken. She thought of the woman she had been that terrible night, standing alone on a dark street with a suitcase and a secret, certain only of her own innocence and determined to find the truth no matter what it cost her. That woman could never have imagined this moment, this hard-won peace, this fragile but genuine trust rebuilt from the wreckage of betrayal and lies. But she had found it anyway, through persistence, through the unwavering support of a true friend, through a truth that had ultimately refused to stay hidden no matter how carefully others had tried to bury it. Elena walked quietly down the hallway toward the nursery, one hand resting briefly against the doorframe of the home she had once been forced to leave, now fully, undeniably hers again, filled with a family built stronger through the very fire that had once threatened to destroy it entirely.